Well, I think there is, there's a good reason why Hume drew the line there. When you hear the physical laws of nature being violated, which I think is what we sort of understand by a miracle, which it's something that would provoke a scientist to have to revise a theory of a predictive event. It just didn't happen once. And the question is that real? Has that ever really happened? Or is it really a function of the subjective experience of those around it? But the subjective experience of those around it tends to be a firm affirmation that it happened. At least that's what we get from the Gospels, where these miracles seem to be signs. I sometimes wonder whether they haven't been garbled. I sometimes wonder whether, for example, the blind shall see is not so much literal as deeper, which is that, as Jesus points out, it was his faith that allowed the blind man to see. Even though I completely concede, the tale clearly says, rub some spit on some ground on his eyes, and then he could see. The question is whether that blind man, having encountered Jesus and everything around Jesus, the calm, the peace, the sense of godness that surrounded him, decided that what we understand as sight is kind of irrelevant, that he could see the real things. He could see what really mattered. And whether these are not metaphors or devices to explain the radicalism of the transformation that the being in touch with God can bring. And the only way to really explain that in a first century term, or even for much of human history, is for there to be magic tricks. So I tend to look at them with some difficulty, but I'm loath to say I don't believe they ever happened, because I think it's perfectly possible to say I'm not sure that some physical transformation took place. But look, if you believe in God, then the power that God has is infinite, therefore miracles are possible. I just don't believe that miracles were necessary for Jesus' message to work. Certainly not for us today. The miracle is his fundamental teaching, his fundamental grasp of who we are as human beings and what we are to do in this perplexing existence that we're in. That's the miracle. And the other miracle is the world as it actually is. I remember Bob Wright talking at one point to me about a long session he did of silent meditation and how the distinction between flowers and weeds became very hard for him to understand, because he was so suffused with God that what we had conventionally understood as inferior was just as good and as amazing and as beautiful as a fully realized flower. I think living with Jesus around one makes everything miraculous. And I must say, I remember a couple of moments in my own life of transcendence, and they're represented by images because they happened. One was simply a daffodil and a bunch of daffodils in New College, Oxford, my second year, walking past it for one brief second, transcendence through the beauty of this thing, which in some ways I felt about as a miracle. The second was not long after my diagnosis as HIV positive, walking down by the Charles River in Boston, and simply a rustle of leaves in a tree that also, at that moment in time, staggered me as just simply miraculous. To watch each of these amazing, beautiful pieces of vegetation, but color and light and air, just ripple for once. What we have taken for granted is so amazing if we only deconstruct it and stop and look at it, that I think miracles exist everywhere. Therefore, and I don't mean that as a cutesy kind of easy rhetorical get out, but I do think that it's true, that the greater miracle is life itself. And that in trying to impress upon people the extraordinary power of Jesus, which could only really be experienced by personal contact, I think, the miracles perform a purpose in the Gospels of insisting upon something that's very difficult to explain in literal terms.